And welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this lecture, we're going to be creating a NodeJS application, and we're going to use the X-Ray software development kit to send performance data about that application over to AWS X-Ray. And we're going to do it all using Elastic Beanstalk and take advantage of the integration between Elastic Beanstalk and AWS X-Ray. In order for us to use the AWS X-Ray service to monitor our application, we need some permissions set up for our application that is using the AWS X-Ray software development kit. So it will need to have permission to send segment document information to the daemon, and also the X-Ray daemon that is running will need to have permission after it has collected that data to forward that on to the AWS X-Ray service. Now, if we're using Elastic Beanstalk, we can automatically, in our configuration file, enable X-Ray integration with Elastic Beanstalk. And what Elastic Beanstalk will do is it will not only run our application with its AWS X-Ray software development kit, it will also run as a separate process on the same EC2 instances. It will run the AWS X-Ray daemon. And so that makes life a lot easier for us. And what will happen is that our application will pass its segment documents over to the X-Ray daemon, and it'll all be happening on the same EC2 instances. Now, for that to happen, we need some permissions to be set up. So first of all, we need to have permission for the software development kit that is running on our application to pass those segment documents over to the daemon, so that the daemon knows what information to collect. And then the daemon needs to have permission to forward what it has collected over to the AWS X-Ray service. Now, fortunately for us, the Elastic Beanstalk already has those permissions set up, but we can check that by going to Services and then into our IAM Management Console. We go to Roles, and we're going to search for an EC2 role. And there we have, we've got the Elastic Beanstalk EC2 role that Elastic Beanstalk uses for its EC2 instances that it launches. We'll click on that. It has 4 policies attached to it. One of those policies is the Elastic Beanstalk Web Tier. So let's have a look at that one. Okay, so in that policy, we've got some permissions for Amazon S3 to list and put objects in there. We've also got X-Ray access. So what we've got there are 2 permissions. So we've got put trace segments. That will be used by the AWS X-Ray software development kit, and it will be used to send segment documents over to the X-Ray daemon that will also be running on that same EC2 instance. So that EC2 instance will also need permission to put telemetry records for the daemon to pass those telemetry records over to the X-Ray server. So it'll pass that trace data that it is collected about our application over to the X-Ray service. So that is set up fine, but of course, make sure that you go in and make sure that it is already set up for you, but it should by default be there. Now, before we actually start our Elastic Beanstalk application, we're going to go to the repository, or our starting branch of the repository for our application code. And that will be in the lab document. So make sure that you download those lab notes as always and get the link to that. And let's start having a look at this code. So we've got our EB extensions folder, and that will contain all of the configuration information that we're going to use to set up Elastic Beanstalk. So let's have a look at that one. And we've got 2 there. We've got an options.config and an xray.config. Now, all of these configurations could be in the run.config file. It doesn't have to be in separate ones, but it is obviously a good practice to separate them into the service and the actual Elastic Beanstalk core options that you are configuring. So we're just going to the options there for Elastic Beanstalk. The first one there is we're creating an application environment. So this is an environment variable that our Node.js application can reference. And that is called AWS_region. And it's going to reference the AWS region that our EC2 instance is running on. So that will appear to our application as an environment variable called region. And we've also got there that we're going to be running Nginx for Node.js, and we're also going to be putting all of our static files into a static folder here as well. So let's go back to the application. And we can see there we've got that static directory. It's going to have our Bootstrap and jQuery libraries there. They're not going to be changing, they're static. And it's going to have our view, which is going to have a pug document that's going to have the details of our HTML web application. And finally there we've got our app.js, which is going to have our Node.js or JavaScript code. Now the first thing we see there is that we've got X-Ray require the AWS X-Ray software development kit. Now that is different to the AWS software development kit. Also, if we want to capture any calls to the or through the AWS software development kit, for example, if further on in this application we're going to be making some calls to Amazon S3, if we want to capture those as well, we need to require the AWS software development kit inside of this capture AWS. And finally, there we also need to have capture HTTPS, and we're going to require HTTP, and that will monitor all of our HTTP requests to and from our application. And further down here, we can see here that we've got AWS config.region. And as we said before, we set that up in our configuration file, and we can reference that, and that's going to get the current region for this application that it is running on. And then we also need to set our sampling rules. So there's going to be a sampling rules.json file. We'll have a look at that soon. And there's going to be here, we've got our start X-ray segment. So this is where we define our segment that we're going to be collecting data with. So we've got here, we're going to call our segment my front end, and we're going to finish that at the end of our application here. We're going to close that segment there as well. So within here and here, we're going to have a segment called my front end, and that will appear on the AWS X-Ray when we look at the dashboard. We've got a sub-segment here that we're going to be calling page render. And so what we do is we do X-Ray capture async function, and we call it page render, and then we're going to put that segment or that segment that we're capturing inside here. So there we can do, we're just going to be rendering that application and giving it a title, and then we're just going to be closing that sub-segment there. So segment.close. And that's what's going to happen. So we're just going to have a very simple application. It's just going to display a HTML web page, and we're going to have that as a segment. And inside that segment, we're just going to have one single sub-segment. And just go back to the main root directory here. And as we said before, we have sampling rules.json. So there we've got our default sampling rules. We're going to have a target of 1 sample per second, and the rate is going to be 1. So what that means is that when we've got over, or any samples that go over 1 sample per second, we're going to get all of those additional samples as well. So we're going to get 100% of those. So if we had a target of 1 sample per second, and we only wanted to get, say, 10% of those additional all those additional traces that were coming in, or those additional requests, we can have the rate as 0.1, and it'll only collect the extra 10% for that period of 1 second. So that's how we set up those sampling rules, but there's a lot more to sampling rules, but go beyond what you need to know for a associate level certification. Okay, so that's enough on the application. Let's get in and run it. So what we do is we first need to download it. Now this zip file that I'm downloading here, we cannot use that directly with Elastic Beanstalk, and don't try and do it because you'll get an error. You'll get a 502 error when you go to do it. So what we need to do is that we just need to show in folder. Okay, so the reason we can't use this directly, this zip file, is if we double click on it and have a look at it, we can see that all of our code is inside this folder. So if we upload this directly, Elastic Beanstalk's not going to be able to find that code. It's going to be expecting it here, not hidden inside this folder. So we need to get it outside of this folder. So first off, we'll extract it. Okay, so that's extracted that. What we need to do is just open this up, and what we're going to do now is just create another zip file in here. So send to compressed folder. Okay, that's good. All right, so now we can use that to upload to Elastic Beanstalk, and we're ready to go. Okay, so back into Elastic Beanstalk Management Console, and if we haven't got any applications up and running, this is what we're going to get, just a welcome screen. So we click on Create New Application in the top right-hand corner here, and we'll give this a name and create that. Okay, so let's create an environment first. It's a web server environment, and we'll just leave that name, and we'll leave it for auto-generating a domain for us. That's fine. And we select NodeJS, and we're going to upload our code, and we'll upload that now. So our app.zip, and we upload that, and upload. Okay, and create our environment. Okay, so our environment will start chugging away there, and soon it will be up and running. Okay, so after quite some time, we've got our environment up and running. Let's click on the endpoint for that environment, and we can see there we've got our simple HTML page. Nothing too spectacular there. So let's have a look and see whether X-Ray actually collected any of that data that we requested. So we go into Services, we go into X-Ray. I'm just going to open that into a new tab. And it will be computing that map. It might take some time, depending on how much data you've got. If you've got less than a minute, it won't come up. If you've got a minute or so, you should come up with a bit of data. And there we can see we've got our service there, our node, and it's my front end. So remember, we created a segment in our application called my front end, and that's what's appeared here. So we've got a problem here. So we've got most of it's okay, but one of those requests came with an error. And that's going to be an orange, so it's a client-side error. So it must be something like a 404 error. We've made a request for something that doesn't exist. So we can click on this node here, and we can see information about the response distribution of the request. So we've got some requests there, and we can see that they vary from up to 1 second down to 100 or 200 milliseconds there. So what we can do now is that we can filter our traces based on that error. So we're just going to click on here on that error because we just want to see the problem traces, and we're going to click on View Traces here. And here we can see our trace list. So we click on that actual trace ID, and we can see what the problem is. So it was my front end, and it gave us a 404 error. What we can do now is that we can click on that again, and that will give us more information about that segment, which was my front end, and what caused it to give an error. So if we look down here further, we've got the request URL, and it was for our favicon.icon. Now, we didn't actually have one in our application, so it made a request for that, and it didn't actually exist. So that was where the problem was, and not a major deal. We can just not worry about, but later on we can, if we're going to create a real application, we're going to put a favicon icon there for our application, we can do that. So we just close that out now. What we want to do now is that we want to actually start looking at how we can trace calls to the software development kits, the actual AWS software development kit. So what we're going to do is that we're going to call the Amazon S3 service. We're going to list the buckets, and we're going to see how long that's going to take. So we need to make some changes to our application code to make that happen. So again, we'll just jump back into our repository, and we'll now go to the master node, which will have the completed application there. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the changes that I've made to this so that we can actually monitor those calls to the AWS or using the AWS Software Development Kit. So again, we've already set this up previously, but we have a require AWS Software Development Kit inside of the X-ray.capture AWS, and that will capture all calls that are going to the Software Development Kit or from the Software Development Kit. And what we do now is we just scroll down here, and in our capture async function, we're going to have an S3 list buckets here. And then at the same time, we're also going to have our rendering out there as well. And then we're going to close off that segment. So what we'll do is we'll see exactly the same as what we had before. We'll see that segment, my front end, will come up as a node, but we should have another node there as well for this call to Amazon S3. And it's just going to output that when it renders this, it's going to do it to a variable there called bucket list, and we're going to put that in to the view. So I'll just go back into the view here and index. If we see down there that we're just going to output that bucket list. It's just going to be a string of all of the buckets that I've got on this account. So again, we'll go back up here and we'll save that zip file or download that zip file. And again, we need to extract it and get it all into the right format. Show in folder. Let's have a look. And I've just extracted that file, that zip file. Just go into it, and again, we need to select everything and put it into a higher level zip folder. And we'll just open that up, make sure that is fine. That is not a problem. So just go back in there. We can now update our Elastic Beanstalk environment to have our new code. So go back into the Elastic Beanstalk environment, click on Upload and Deploy, choose our file. And we'll just give it a version label. So version 2 will be fine, and deploy that. Okay, again, so after some time, we've got our new version 2 up and running. We'll click on that endpoint there. So it's the same web page as before, but we've got this list of our buckets there that I've got on this account. So everything seems to be working. So we should be able to see as a trace this call to Amazon S3 to list those buckets. So we'll go back into AWS X-ray. We'll click on the service map and we'll refresh it. So we just click on the right-hand side here and refresh, and map is updating. Okay, so there we can see that we've got, again, as before, we've got our My Front End, and we've also got this other service node here for Amazon S3. So the My Front End will be exactly the same as before, but if we click on S3, we can see there that we've got a single call, and it took about 150 or so milliseconds. There was no errors on that. So we review those traces, and we click on the trace ID down here. We can see some more information about it. So there we can see we've got our My Front End segment. Inside our My Front End segment, we have a page render subsegment, and that took up 1.2 seconds. And we've also got a call to Amazon S3, which was a list buckets call here. And we can see there that the big thing that took the time was the page render, but the call to Amazon S3 was quite quick. No, not a problem there. And we get some more information about the S3 there. And we can see there that it took 163 milliseconds there. It was 200. It was a successful call. If we click on that, we can get some more information about it. And there we can see no errors, the resources, and we can see there as it's a list buckets and the region, the request ID, all fine there. So that's pretty good. You pretty will have a good understanding now of how X-ray works, how it can monitor calls, HTTP calls to your requests, and how it can, or how you can set up segments of your code and monitor those segments and sub-segments if you want to look at the performance of different parts of your application. And you can also monitor calls to AWS services as well. So that brings us to an end. What we need to do now is clean it all up. So we just close X-Ray there. We just need to go into our applications there in Elastic Beanstalk and click on the X-Ray Lab and Actions and delete that application. Don't delete the environment, delete the application, and it would delete everything that is associated with that application. So we just delete that and we should be up and running. So just click on that environment again. And we can see there, Elastic Beanstalk is terminating your environment. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of this one. It's a very good hands-on lab. And I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.